Back in 1979, Hot Rod magazine called this Pontiac Trans Am the last American muscle car. Was it? Hi there, Rick DeBrule here with another chapter in the automotive evolution. Once again at the Martin Auto Museum in Phoenix. You know, we have more than 180 cars here, with just about every decade represented. But it's hard to find any car in this collection that's quite as flashy as this 1979 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. But before we talk about this particular car and whether it is the last muscle car, take a moment to like and subscribe. And in the comments below, let me know what I got right, what I got wrong. There's always something I got wrong. And tell me your Firebird story, your Trans Am story. Did you own one of these? Did your parents have one? Do you call this the Screaming Chicken? All right. Now let's turn our attention back to this 1979 Trans Am. You know, this was the 10th anniversary for the Trans Am name in the Pontiac world. And it came about because they wanted to capitalize on a racing series that, ironically, they didn't actually do well in. Now, the Trans Am name goes back to 1966, when the Sports Car Club of America launched a series for production-based sedans, basically pony cars. One class was limited to 5 liters, 305 cubic inches. It was mostly American stuff. And then there was an under 2-liter category, which had a lot of foreign cars. At first, there was no driver's championship, only the manufacturer's crown. And the car makers quickly took notice. Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, even American Motors got involved. And within just a few years, it became one of the most competitive and popular forms of road racing in the United States. Manufacturers love the win on Sunday, sell on Monday marketing advantage. Pontiac, though, they wanted to share the limelight. So they agreed to license the Trans Am name from the Sports Car Club of America for $5 per car. But lost in the marketing hype was the fact that not only had Pontiac not won a championship, it had never even won a single Trans Am race. But you know what? They didn't care. They started marketing the Trans Am in 1969 with a modest run. Just under 700 were sold. But the next year, things popped and nearly 3,200 Trans Ams were bought. And throughout the 70s, well, sales started to grow and they climbed. And by the time this 1979 model came out, they sold more than 117,000 Trans Am, the highest Trans Am total of all time. And that number also means the Trans Am accounted for more than half of all the Firebird sales in '79. And it was nearly 20,000 more than the Z28 sales for that same year. So why did this car do so well? Well, you have to remember that performance waned during the 70s. You know, there was concerns about fuel mileage. And in fact, that's what prompted Ford to come out with the Mustang II. And while that Mustang II actually sold pretty well, it just didn't have a lot of style or performance. And style, well, that might as well have been the middle name for this Trans Am. It looked fast and flashy, just as it was sitting still. And then there was that little thing called Smokey and the Bandit, you know, the movie that came out in 1977, and the black Trans Am might as well have been Burt Reynolds' co-star. The Trans Am might not have had mega performance back in 1979, might not have had the latest technology, but it had the right looks, the right star power, and the right lineage to be the top muscle car of 1979, and could potentially lay claim to being the last muscle car, at least back then. All right, let's walk around and take a look at the styling on our 1979 Pontiac Firebird. And there were some pretty significant changes up front that we'll have to talk about. And that's the fact that in 1978, it used a grill, an inset grill that came across from one side to the other, had a little peak down here for that Pontiac beak, as we sometimes call it. For 1979, well, they went to this front fascia that's really more aerodynamic. They got rid of the grill on either side, moved the headlights into their own rectangular bezels right here. Some people love that Smokey and the Bandit style with the grill that goes across. Some people like this later 1979 edition. Either way, it's a great look. And of course, on the hood is the massive Screaming Chicken. Now, plenty of people get offended when you call it the Screaming Chicken. It's the Phoenix Rising, the Trans Am Bird, a variety of different names. But a lot of people over the years have called it the Screaming Chicken, and so it's more of a term that I think a lot of people, use as an affinity term. But if you're offended by it, just call it the Phoenix Rising, but I tend to call it the Screaming Chicken because that's what an awful lot of Trans Am people called it over the years. There were a few other changes that were made that year, some wider fender wells for the flares, I should say this color is solar gold. Of course, the most popular color back then was that black and gold from Smokey and the Bandit. But boy, this color shows really well. And we talk about styling, that's pretty important. Of course, we have the shaker hood, the TA 6.6 liter. We'll talk about that engine in a moment, the 400 cubic inch engine. This shaker hood is called a shaker hood because this is mounted directly onto the air cleaner on the engine that is underneath. It's not mounted, connected to the hood at all. And they call it a shaker because as you were driving down the road and the engine would be shaking, this hood, this scoop right here would be shaking as well. So that pops out. And this is functional. That goes down right through to allow air into the engine. This is a shape that came out initially in 1970 for the second generation of both the Firebird and the Camaro. So by 1979, it was getting a little bit long in the tooth, but it had been pretty advanced when it came out in 1970, so it wasn't too bad. In the back, there were some styling changes as well. This section right here in 1978 didn't go all the way across. The license plate would have been here. Now it had this. This color I mentioned, solar gold, this was not a 10th anniversary edition, even though it was the 10th anniversary. The 10th anniversary edition had a special silver and charcoal two-tone paint job. And they only made a limited number of those. But this technically, either way you look at it, was still a 10th anniversary model. It just didn't have the 10th anniversary package. What this did have, this particular car right here, has what's called the WS6 package, which is a handling package. It includes those cool cast aluminum snowflake wheels. It's got a handling package, wider tires, rear disc brakes. And in fact, Car and Driver actually called this the best handling American car of 1979. So while the chassis may have been a little long in the tooth come 1979, it still actually was pretty effective at doing what they wanted it to do. Now remember, this is a Firebird Trans Am. There were different Firebirds you could get. You could get the base model, you could get the Esprit, the Formula, or ultimately max out at the Trans Am. It's got about 108-inch wheelbase. And remember, that year you were still coming out of the Mustang II era. The Fox body Mustang was introduced in 1979, and that only had about a 100-inch wheelbase. The result was this was longer, it was more comfortable inside, and it really was the car you wanted to take on a date. It had flash and style and comfort. All right, let's lift the hood and see what we've got in the engine compartment. You know, the base Firebird had a 231 cubic inch V8 engine that made 105 horsepower. The base engine, though, for the Trans Am was the 301 cubic inch Pontiac V8. It made about 140 horsepower. The hot ticket engine, though, in '79 was the 400, also known as the 6.6. That's exactly the engine that we have right here in our museum car. Now, when I say hot, it was partially because it had the highest horsepower output of any engine available in the Trans Am, 220. But it was also hot because there weren't a lot available. You know, this engine was basically left over from 1978. A big chunk of them were set aside for the 10th anniversary edition Trans Am. So that meant folks were fighting over what was left. I think there were about 8,300 Trans Ams with the TA 6.6. This engine's roots basically go back to the mid-1950s. The 400 cubic inch version came out in '67. It maxed out in '69 and '70 with the Ram Air 4 package that made 370 horsepower. As the '70s moved along, emission standards and fuel economy concerns throttled it back further and further. Now, there was a third engine option, let's call it the other 6.6. It was a 403 cubic inch, 185 horsepower, the Oldsmobile motor. It really only made 185 horses, but because of the limited number of 400s available, this ended up in a lot of Trans Ams. Now, while those numbers sound pretty anemic today, you do have to remember the times. The best you could get from a Corvette in 1979 was 225 horsepower. The new 5-liter Mustang, well, that only made 140 horses. Still, you put a shaker hood on the top of this engine, and whatever motor you had just looked mean. All right, before we step into our 1979 Pontiac Trans Am, I want to take you back to 1967, the original Firebird. We just happen to have one here at the museum, this beautiful convertible. And, it's a very different experience when you get in this car compared to that Trans Am from 1979. Got to remember, this was one of the original pony cars. Now, in some ways, though, it is very similar, right? You have bucket seats, small back seat, center console, sporty look. But I'll tell you what, the seats aren't nearly going to be as comfortable as what we're going to get in that 1969 in just a moment. Steering wheel feels kind of spindly and it doesn't look very sporty, very simple with these 3 spokes. But the basic concept is still the same, right? Those sporty gauges, something cool in the center. I like the way they've got the center console that flows down from up above to down below. But once again, in terms of simplicity, this was it. Now, when we go to 1979, things are going to bump up a notch. All right, now let's step into the 1979 Pontiac Firebird. By now, of course, this is a Trans Am. They didn't have a Trans Am back in 1967. And while the layout is basically the same, the execution, to be honest with you, is so much nicer. First off, from a driving perspective, this seating position is much more comfortable. They can have a little more side support in the seats, but overall, the seats have, well, first off, they're easier to get into. They've got a better feel once you're inside, and the driving position just feels better in terms of where everything is set up. And look at the steering wheel. I mean, that spindly little thing that we had over there in the 1967, this is much sportier. It's got a smaller look to it. It's got a better feel to it. And of course, it's got these cool spokes. So, still a 3-spoked wheel, but the execution, once again, is a lot different. Still has the center console concept, 2 bucket seats up front, a minimal back seat because that's what pony cars are meant to do. But boy, look at this dash, right? This engine-tuned look, with the aluminum feel to it, the gauges that are set into it. Once again, still 2 round gauges that are in front of you, but the execution, I go back to, just looks so much cooler, so much nicer overall. This is not fancy, right? We don't have, power windows in here. I'm assuming we don't have power seats. Yep, regular old seats. We just have a standard AM, FM radio. Nothing fancy in terms of climate control. But boy, this engine right here, this interior, feels so great. I said engine because I was looking out and the first thing that caught my attention was that great big shaker hood. You're driving down the road, you got that 6.6 liter. If you lean a little bit, you can see the sticker off to one side. But the important thing is you can see that shaker hood scoop sticking up way above, or at least a couple inches above the regular hood. This is ultimately the sweet spot for what muscle cars were supposed to be. But the important thing is when you look at that 1967, you see the evolution and how it got from those original pony cars to where we are 12 years later in 1979. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, when Pontiac first licensed the name Trans Am from the Sports Car Club of America, they hadn't won a single Trans Am race. Well, the good news is that ultimately that did change. They finally won their first Trans Am race in 1972, and a decade later became Trans Am champion. But let's talk about the question of whether Hot Rod Magazine was right. Was this the last muscle car? Well, it did have that 400 cubic inch engine that was a remnant of the height of the muscle car era. Fortunately for all of us, muscle cars weren't dead. And over the course of the next few decades, horsepower would only grow and grow and grow. Still, this car stands out. In many ways, it defines the late 70s. Plenty of glitter and glam and synthetic luxury in an era when performance was almost secondary to spectacle. The Trans Am, back in 1979, was the car that you wanted to be seen in.